You raise your son to be a man of integrity. You work double shifts for 30 years so he never has to want for anything. And then one afternoon you open your email and find a message that tells you his fiance's family considers you an embarrassment. Not because you did anything wrong, not because of any history between us, simply because I didn't graduate from the right university. I read that email 3 times. Then I closed my laptop, walked out to the back porch, and stood there for a long time looking at the oak tree my wife Margaret had planted the year our son was born. She never lived to see it grow this tall. She never lived to see what he became either, and standing there that afternoon, I wasn't sure whether that was a mercy or a tragedy. My name is Gerald, and I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working as a facilities manager for a hospital network in central Ohio. It wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't the kind of career that gets you invited to the right dinner parties or impresses anyone's future in-laws. But it was honest, and it paid well enough that I was able to do something I'm genuinely proud of. I put my son through college without a single dollar of student debt. I helped him launch a small business when he was 26, and when that business struggled in its second year, I quietly transferred $40,000 into his account without him ever having to ask twice. His name is Daniel, and for most of his life, I believed we had the kind of relationship that other fathers envied. Margaret passed away from ovarian cancer when Daniel was 11 years old. Those years after her death were the hardest of my life, and I won't pretend otherwise. I was grieving and exhausted and completely unprepared to raise a boy alone. I made mistakes. I probably let things go that I should have addressed. But I showed up every single day. I coached his little league team when I had no business coaching anything. I drove him to every school event, sat through every parent-teacher conference, learned to cook well enough that he didn't have to eat cereal for dinner more than twice a week. I was both parents for 12 years, and I did it without asking for credit or sympathy. When Daniel graduated from Ohio State, I cried in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I could compose myself enough to take photographs. When he met Sophia at a conference in Chicago 3 years ago, I welcomed her warmly. She was sharp, well-educated, and came from a family in Connecticut that had what I can only describe as very particular ideas about social standing. I noticed it early. The way her mother looked around my house the first time she visited, taking in the modest furniture and the unfinished basement. The way her father, a retired investment banker named Richard, seemed to speak to me rather than with me, as though I were a customer service representative he was obligated to be polite to. I told myself I was being uncharitable. People are products of their environments, and Sophia herself was always perfectly pleasant to me. I focused on the fact that my son was happy. The engagement was announced at Christmas 2 years ago. Daniel called me the night before to tell me privately, which I appreciated. Sophia's ring had been her grandmother's, reset by a jeweler in Manhattan, a detail Richard mentioned no fewer than 4 times over dinner. The wedding, I was told, would be held the following autumn at Sophia's family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. It would be, in the words of her mother Patricia, an intimate but elevated affair. I smiled and congratulated them and meant every word of it. What I did not know at that dinner table was that a conversation had already happened, or was about to happen, that would reframe everything I thought I understood about my relationship with my son. 3 months after the engagement, Daniel came to visit me alone. He seemed uncomfortable from the moment he arrived, which I noticed but didn't press. We had dinner, talked about his business, watched some television. It was only as he was getting ready to leave that he brought it up, standing in my hallway with his coat already on. The way people deliver difficult news when they've already secured their exit. He told me that Sophia's family had certain expectations for the wedding, that the guest list was being carefully curated, that Richard and Patricia had expressed some concern. He used the word concern. I remember it precisely about how the 2 sides of the family would mix. He said it in the gentlest way he could, but what he was telling me was clear enough. His future in-laws were worried I would not fit in, that my background, my education, my general presentation would create an awkward contrast with their world. He wasn't uninviting me. He was asking me with considerable discomfort, to his credit, whether I might be willing to attend a smaller, private dinner the week after the wedding instead. A celebration just for us, he said. More relaxed, more us. I looked at my son for a long moment. He was 41 years old, and he was standing in my hallway, unable to meet my eyes. And I thought about the 11-year-old boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms because he was still afraid of the dark after his mother died. I told him I needed a few days to think about it. He looked relieved, which told me everything. I spent those days thinking about Margaret, thinking about what she would say if she knew her son was standing in his father's hallway asking that father to quietly disappear from the most important day of his adult life because some banker from Connecticut found me insufficiently polished. I thought about the $40,000 I had transferred without hesitation when his business was failing. I thought about the college tuition, the years of sacrifice, the oak tree in the backyard. I also thought, carefully and without self-pity, about money. Over the past 18 months, I had made a series of financial commitments related to the wedding. At Daniel's request, gentle requests, framed always as conversations, never as demands, I had agreed to contribute $75,000 toward the wedding costs. I had already paid $30,000 of that directly to the venue as a partial deposit, transferred in my name. The remaining $45,000 I had promised verbally, but not yet delivered. I had also agreed to cover the rehearsal dinner entirely, which was budgeted at another $18,000, and was being planned at a restaurant in Greenwich that required a signed contract with a named guarantor. My name was on that contract. I had not signed it yet. I had been sent the paperwork 2 weeks earlier, and had been meaning to return it. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and looked at that unsigned contract for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney. I want to be clear about something because I think it matters. I did not make this decision in anger. I have never been a man who acts well when he acts in anger, and I knew this about myself. I waited until I was calm. I waited until I could think about it the way I would think about any serious financial decision, clearly, without heat, focused only on what was real and what was right. What was real was this. I had been asked to fund a celebration I was being quietly excluded from, not by strangers, by my son. And while Daniel had not used ugly words, the message had been delivered on behalf of people who found me beneath them, and my son had carried that message instead of refusing to. What was right was to stop. I did not call Daniel. I did not write him an emotional letter. I contacted the venue directly, and citing a change in financial circumstances, formally withdrew my name from the deposit guarantee. The venue's contract had a specific provision for this. My attorney had reviewed it, and while the situation was complicated, I was not legally bound to the full amount given the deposit structure. I returned the rehearsal dinner contract unsigned, with a brief note to the restaurant explaining I would not be serving as guarantor. Then I waited. I want you to understand the particular quality of those 10 days. They were not easy days. I went to work, came home, watered Margaret's oak tree, cooked dinner, watched the news. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, I was very aware that I was waiting for something to break, and I didn't know exactly when it would happen or how loud it would be. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was eating breakfast when my phone began ringing. Daniel. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Then again. Then a number I didn't recognize, the venue, I later confirmed. Then Daniel again. In the space of 40 minutes, I received 16 missed calls. I finished my breakfast. Then I called my son back. He was not calm. I had rarely heard him like that. His voice had that particular tight quality that in a younger person you might call crying, and in a grown man is something harder to name. He said the venue had contacted Sophia's parents to confirm the revised payment arrangements, and that Richard had called him immediately, and that there was now a significant problem with the deposit structure, and that the rehearsal dinner restaurant had told them the guarantor had withdrawn. I let him finish. Then I said, Daniel, I need you to think back to the conversation we had in my hallway 3 months ago, and I need you to understand that this is my response to that conversation. Silence. I love you, I said. I have loved you every single day of your life, including the days when it was very hard to do, and I will love you until I am gone. But I will not pay $75,000 to be excluded from the event that money is funding. If I'm not welcome as your father, then I'm not available as your bank. More silence. Then he said very quietly, Dad, it wasn't my idea. I know, I said. That's the part that hurt most. We stayed on the phone for another few minutes without saying much. When we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and let myself feel the full weight of it, not the anger, which had mostly passed, but the grief. The specific grief of loving someone completely and discovering that love has limits you didn't know about, limits that were drawn somewhere without your knowledge. What happened next, I learned about gradually, over the following weeks. The wedding was not canceled. It was significantly scaled back. Without my contribution, the venue had to be changed to something considerably more modest. The rehearsal dinner was moved to a different restaurant. Richard and Patricia, I was told through Daniel's cousin who called me privately to say she thought the whole situation was shameful, were furious. Not, I noted, furious at their own behavior, but furious at the disruption. Sophia and Daniel had several serious arguments. I don't know the details of those conversations, and I don't want to. That is their marriage and their private life. What I know is that Daniel called me 6 weeks after that Tuesday morning phone call and asked if he could come see me. He arrived on a Saturday afternoon. He looked tired in the way that people look tired when they haven't been sleeping well for a long time. We sat on the back porch, the same porch where I had stood looking at Margaret's oak tree the afternoon. I first read that email, and he talked for a long time. He told me he had known, even as he was standing in my hallway, that what he was asking was wrong. He told me he had told himself it was a compromise, a practical solution to a social problem, and that he had believed or made himself believe that I would understand, and that it wouldn't really matter because the private dinner afterward would make it right. He told me he had been a coward, and that the word was his, not mine. I listened to all of it. When he was done, I told him that I accepted his apology, and that I meant it, and that we would be fine, because we would. He is my son. There is no version of my life in which I closed the door on my son. But I also told him something else. I told him that what this experience had clarified for me was not just about money, and not really even about the wedding. It was about what a person is willing to do when the people they love are treated as less than they deserve. I told him that a man who spends 30 years building a life for the people he loves is not a liability to be managed. He is the foundation those people stand on. And if the people he has spent his life building toward ever forget that if they begin to see the foundation as an embarrassment rather than a gift, then the foundation has every right to make itself known. He nodded slowly. He didn't argue with any of it. Before he left, he helped me clear the gutters, which had been bothering me for weeks. We worked side by side for a couple of hours without saying much, which is something we used to do when he was young, the two of us working on some task around the house while the radio played in the background and Margaret moved around inside. Some of the best hours of my life were hours like that, hours that didn't seem like anything at the time. Driving away, he beeped the horn twice the way he always used to when he was a teenager. I stood in the driveway and watched until his car turned the corner, and then I went inside. I thought about Margaret, the way I always do at moments that feel significant. I thought about what she would make of all of this. The wedding, the emails, the phone calls, the Tuesday morning breakfast, the gutters. I think she would have been heartbroken by parts of it. I think she also would have understood why I did what I did, because Margaret was the one who first taught me that love without boundaries isn't love. It's just permission. She used to say that to me when Daniel was small and I was inclined to let things go because I was tired and grieving and it was easier. Love without boundaries isn't love, Gerald. It's just permission. I am 63 years old. I have buried my wife, raised my son alone, worked a job I didn't love for 3 decades because it was the right thing to do for my family, and I have tried at every step to be the kind of man that the people who depend on me could count on. I am not perfect. I made mistakes as a father, but I showed up every single time, and I never once asked to be treated as though showing up was something to be embarrassed about. Truly! The oak tree in my backyard is 30 years old now. Margaret planted it as a seedling the spring after Daniel was born, and she always said she couldn't wait to see how tall it would grow. She didn't get to see it, but I do every morning when I have my coffee on the back porch, and every evening when the light comes through the leaves in that particular way it does in October. Some things take a long time to grow. Some things are worth waiting for. And some things, once they take root, cannot be moved no matter how inconvenient they might be to people who would prefer a different view. I have no interest in burning myself down to keep anyone else warm. Margaret taught me that too, though she took longer to learn it herself. I'm a slower learner than she was, always have been, but I got there eventually. And if you are someone who has ever been made to feel like your presence is a problem, like the years you gave and the love you poured out and the sacrifices no one saw are less important than someone else's idea of how things ought to look, then I want you to hear this clearly. You are not the embarrassment. You are the reason there is anything worth celebrating at all. If this story stayed with you, please leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, subscribe to MT Sweet Revenge. We're here every week, and we always have more to share.